So God, we are here grateful. We're here grateful because not one of us is perfect. We all mess it up sometimes, more often than not, and more often than we'd care to admit. And yet when we have those moments of clarity, we come to realize in fresh ways that your grace is still abundant. It's still here. That your very nature is love and grace. And that your desire is not to impugn us, but your desire is to restore us again and again and again and again and again. And that's why we say so confidently, it is your breath in our lungs. You are the one that animates us. That is why we're able to say, everywhere we go, we see you, because we see your grace abounding everywhere. And it's why we can say, when we've been there even 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, fully restored, we will have no less days to sing your praise than when we first began. So may our hearts continue to sing our thanks, our gratitude, and our testimony. Your grace is here. And it is enough. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a seat. So, I'm singing today because Jennifer came in my office this week. We usually meet together sometime during the week and go over what songs make sense for the day. And anyway, she was sounding a lot more like Peppermint Patty than Jennifer Nell. And so she didn't even need to ask. I just said, hey, why don't I take it this week, and we'll see what happens. Now, this coming Sunday, Mother's Day, it's really, even though we call it Mother's Day because Hallmark makes us do that, the reality is it's a celebration of women. And so if you are a female, then we're going to be celebrating you next week. Men are going to serve you and enjoy it. And you're going to have good food. Music's going to be different next week. It's going to be more serenading. And so we've got some love songs that are going to come out. And the reason why I want to do that is because, so in a lot of our cultural songs, love songs could very easily bleed right over into worship songs. Because God is love. And so when we speak about the depths of love, even to another person, in an interesting kind of roundabout way, we are, in a sense, celebrating God. And so there are going to be a couple, three love songs that will make their way onto the platform to serenade you while you enjoy your food. And then I'll have a talk to the passage that comes right after what we're looking at today. So Trudy, go ahead and bring up my stuff today. You ever heard of that? I meant to write meeting here instead of moment. You know what a come to Jesus meeting is? I mean, even in secular culture, if you say it's time to have a come to Jesus meeting, you know what's going on. There's some accountability about ready to happen. So we asked you the question this morning about how you knew when you were a kid, when you were in trouble. How did you know when you were going to have a come to Jesus meeting with your parents? Anybody shout it out? What'd you do? What was it, Sandy? The full name. Danny, you got the full name treatment too? Okay. Peter Robert Shaw. Get in here right now. What else? What else told you were in trouble? The look. Yes, right. They didn't even need to say anything. If looks could kill, I'd be dead 1,000 times over, for sure. Anything else? How'd you know if you're in trouble? What is it? Ah, yeah, that's right. Silence can be deadly. Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah. Joan's had it all. She's experienced every grade. I know that I had this happen at least one time in my life, and the early service had this happen. If you hear this from your mom, just wait till your father comes home. Did you ever get that one? It's like, oh no. I don't want to wait. Let's just spank me now, whatever. Let's just get this thing over with. Well, today's passage is all about a come to Jesus moment that was very important for a guy named, that we know Peter as the Apostle Peter. Now, I've spoken on this text many times over the years. It was part of my doctoral work, and it's a key part of the Christian story and very instructive on a lot of ways. And so we're going to jump into this text. First, I'm going to read it through with you, then we're going to back up and talk about some things that are there. But just to give you the context, remember, Sam left us last week. It's a breakfast on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And this is a resurrection appearance. The guys are out fishing. They're not catching anything. Jesus is on shore. They don't know it's Jesus yet. He's already got a fire going. He says, hey, how's the fishing? We haven't caught anything. We'll try the other side of the net, or try the other side of the boat. So they cast their net in there, get this huge haul of fish. The net doesn't break. That's significant for next week. They haul in the fish. Peter figures out it's Jesus. He like jumps in the water and gets there first because he's so excited to see Jesus. You need to know that. So Peter is very excited to see Jesus again. He can't wait to see him, which is important because Peter knows that there's some baggage that needs to be taken care of. Because Peter, not too long before this, denied even knowing Jesus. Remember that? He's actually almost more infamous for that than he was for other things. Because he denied even knowing Jesus when Jesus was under a false trial just a stone's throw away. And so he knew he had this unfinished business, but I think the interesting thing here, which again speaks to their understanding of the grace of God, is he jumped into the water to have company with Jesus. When you know somebody is mad at you, how quick are you to run into their company? No way, man, right? If you just got the word, just wait till your father gets home. You're going out for a while, right? You're going to make sure you're not home when father gets home so that you have some time for him to cool off before you have to deal with that, right? I don't know how many husbands and wives, if they know they're in trouble, will just kind of keep their distance in one way or another because they know this thing's happening. But what does it communicate about Jesus? That even though Peter knows this is in their future, Peter's not running. And I just want you to start thinking about the tone of what you're going to see in this story. Because the tone of Jesus here and the tone of the face of God here is not one of this judge on a throne that is ready to bring down the gavel and let you know what an idiot you've been and how deserving you are of harsh treatment. That is not the face of God that we see in Jesus. This meeting's going to happen, but I just want you to have eyes to see the tone of this whole thing that goes on between Jesus and Peter. So I'm going to read it through once, and then we'll come back at it, and I'll point some things out. So here we go. This is the New Revised Standard Version, by the way. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time, he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." So let's back up, Trudy, to the top there, and I just want to point some things out here that might otherwise get unnoticed. So right away, we see it's Jesus and Peter around the campfire on the shore of the lake. So the setting is comfortable. You'll notice that we have no evidence here. There's nothing mentioned in the text about Jesus finding an incredibly pointy rock for Peter to sit on while they have this conversation, or a cactus, or anything like that. The setting that Jesus is creating for this come to Jesus moment is about as peaceful as you can get. It's as comfortable as you can get. He's not finding the most uncomfortable chair So Peter feels uncomfortable. They're around the campfire. How many of you love a good campfire? How many of you love it better if it's by a lake? I mean, come on. You can smell the s'mores, right? I mean, think that's the peaceful, serene setting. So notice that is the picture of where this thing's going to go down, not a courtroom. And then there's something that smacks me right in the face. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. Is there a difference there? Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. You see, I grew up as Peter in my household. I'm named after my grandfather. And my brother and my sisters and my parents and all my aunts and uncles and my grandparents all call me Peter. I became Pete in 8th grade, not by choice. I didn't care, but not by choice. I became Pete because I was new to a school in Okemos, Michigan, suburb of Lansing. And I entered 8th grade at this new middle school, and I played trombone. And I shared first chair with Alex Claypool, playing trombone in the middle school band. Now, Alex Claypool was easily the most popular guy in the whole school. He was Ferris Bueller, if you know what I'm talking about. This guy was cool like crazy, man. I mean, he looked cool. Looked a little bit like Zane here. I mean, just a cool cat, man. Everybody loved him. Everybody, no offense, Ben. Could have looked like Ben, too, honestly. So Ben or Zane, pick out whichever one you want. They were both way cool. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is really sharp guys. And Alex, for whatever reason, even though, you know, I was introduced as Peter and somebody's Peter, just right out of the gate, he started calling me Pete. And that's when everybody started calling me Pete, because if the most popular guy in school is talking about Pete, that's what you call him. So grateful he called me Pete and not something worse. I mean, it could have really gone south. So anyway, that was my name from that point forward. And everybody from that point forward who knew me outside of my family knew me as Pete. So even for my wife, the first time she would be around my family, because she knew me as Pete, was probably taken aback a little bit. Why are they calling you Peter? So everybody calls me Peter in my family. But then my sister went out and married this wonderful guy named Ken. And Ken, he's not quite sure what he wants to be, my friend or family. So sometimes he calls me Peter. But at other times, if we're just sitting around shooting the breeze, he'll call me Pete. Hey, Pete, what do you think about doing this? And I got to tell you that whenever I'm in the family environment and I hear Pete in that circumstance, it's not my wife, it unsettles me. I know somebody is calling me the wrong name. Now, I want to get these two together so that I can be Pete and Peter interchangeably. I'm working on that. I'm only 46. I have a lot of time to learn this. But it blows my mind how our name and what we're called impacts us that much. So I guarantee you that this is no semantic subtlety. That when Jesus calls Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, I guarantee you Peter pays attention, and that he is immediately unsettled. And he's unsettled for a couple reasons. He's unsettled because for the last few years he's been Peter or Pete. And now he's being called Simon, son of John. And you know when he was last called Simon, son of John? It was at the very beginning of his relationship with Jesus. It was before he was an official disciple. In the early part of the Gospel of John, Simon, son of John, is invited to follow Jesus. And as soon as Simon, son of John, says, yes, I'll follow you, Jesus says to him, you are called Simon, son of John, but from this point forward, you will be called Simon Cephas, or Peter. From that point on, he was Pete. And now all of a sudden, he's not Pete. It unsettles him because it's not the name he's heard come out of Jesus' mouth for 3 years. And it unsettled him more deeply because it's a reference to his pre-discipleship days. It's as if Jesus is saying to him, Are you even my disciple? Wow. Do you think that would get your attention? Can you imagine if you're married, and let's say Lynn and I go out to dinner with my folks somewhere, and they run into somebody that they know that we don't. Imagine what this would feel like if my parents introduce my wife and I to their friends and say, this is our son Peter, because they would say Peter. This is our son Peter, and this is his wife Lynn Carlson. What would that communicate to you? I can tell you what it would communicate to me. That I'd be having a long conversation with my wife that evening. Because you would catch the message immediately. There has been something communicated here. So immediately, Peter is kind of on his heels a little bit in this serene environment. Because the name that was just used to get his attention, to enter into conversation, is one that is deeply unsettling. And it lets Peter know, we're going somewhere that I knew we've had to go. I don't really want to go there, but I really want to go there. Because I'm tired of holding on to this stuff. And so then comes the question. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, a little Bible nerd note here that you may never run across, but you can still impress your Bible nerd friends with this little factoid and correct them if they try to make a big deal out of this. So, throughout this little discourse, this exchange, the first 2 times that Jesus says the word love, you can't see it because it's translated to English, but there are actually, I think, 4 or 5 different words that describe love in Greek. Jesus ends up using 2 of them. So he is saying to Peter, do you love me with a godly kind of love? And Peter is remarking, I love you with a brotherly love. And Jesus asks again, do you love me with a godly kind of love? And Peter says, I love you with a brotherly kind of love. And the third time, Jesus changes it, or John changes it in this exchange. Do you love me with a brotherly kind of love? And Peter says, I love you with a brotherly kind of love. So that's kind of how it is. Now, I told you all that. Isn't that fascinating and interesting? So that's Bible nerd thing number 1 that you can point out. And the second Bible nerd thing you can point out to your friends to impress them is that it actually doesn't make any difference. So I just wasted your time. You're welcome. So that's important, though, because you will hear some preachers and other folks. I even read a book recently that made a big deal out of this. But what I want to tell you is that the most reputable scholars that look at the difference between why Jesus used that word love and why he changed it throughout, or why John records him changing it throughout, is actually insignificant. That if you look at the whole Gospel of John, Jesus changes those things out interchangeably, and is very clear in other texts that it is not a meaningful difference. It's just love. So now that we're past that and we've resolved that, are we resolved on that? Everybody feeling okay? All right. So now we have the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter hears that, and he's like, well, yeah, of course I love you. And I think probably the tone with Jesus at this point, or with Peter at this point, is I think he's probably stuttering. Because I think he's kind of a little bit caught off guard. I'm not quite sure what to make of this. This is not how I thought it was going to go. Probably in Peter's mind, because this is probably how all of us would think, we would think that Jesus would just say, Simon, son of John, true or false? Did you or did you not? Actually, that's not really true or false. Did you or did you not deny even knowing me 3 times before the rooster crowed? That's probably how Peter thought it was going to go. And he was probably ready for that. It's not how it went. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yeah, I love you. Then feed my sheep. Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter's still trying to figure out what these things have in connection with each other. And he says, yes, Lord, of course, you know that I love you. And then the third time comes around on the next screen, and he says it again, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, I need to back up and show you one other thing here to get this, to help you see the power of why he's asking this question 3 times in a row. There's an obvious thing we'll look at, but there's a subtlety that would be overlooked by us unless we look at it. The first time he asked the question, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? You know what he's asking? He's asking Mr. Corley here, Stephen. He's saying, Stephen. Say, oh, I'm Jesus. Of course, I get to be Jesus. Stephen, do you love me? Do you love me more than Sal and Carrie and Len and Lakin and Gary? Do you love me more than them? That's a strange question to ask, isn't it? You know why Peter was asked that question? It's because around the table of the Last Supper, around the table the night that Jesus was going to be betrayed, when Jesus unpacking things that are to come and told them to love one another and wash each other's feet and all this beautiful stuff, talking about how it's not going to go well for him in the days ahead, Peter stands up and gives a testimonial in front of the rest of the disciples and says, Jesus, just want you to know, I would lay down my life for you. Thank you very much. Now, that sounds awesome, and I'm sure he meant it with all of his heart. But if you're another follower in the room, what are you thinking? Like, man, what a kiss-up. And now if I say it, it's just going to look like I'm copying it, even though I kind of want to say it. Now I can't say it because Peter stood up and said it. He gets all the credit. Thanks a lot, Peter. And Peter was real bold that way. That's just kind of the guy that he was. He was just kind of known for that. And so after he makes his testimony and says, I will lay down my life for you, it was immediately after that Jesus says, oh, Pete, man, I so wish that were true, but in truth, you're going to die even knowing me before the night's out. And so when Jesus comes and starts this whole exchange with Simon, son of John, my pre-disciple, do you love me more than everybody else here who you basically ripped on just a few nights ago? You still going to hold on to that? That's still where you are? Is that still who you are? Are you still so full of yourself that you're so confident in your love of me that you would make such a bold statement that you love me more than everybody else? That's why Peter is getting tripped up, as he's starting to see things in a different way. And so the third time comes around, and he asked the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to them the third time, do you love me? It's all coming home to Jesus. It's all coming home to Peter, It's all coming home to Peter. Simon, son of John, that's my pre-discipleship name. Do you love me more than these? That reminds me of a statement that I made not so long ago that probably angered everybody else and put me above everybody else. And that very night when Jesus was arrested and was on trial, it was around a campfire where I was asked, do you even know this Jesus? And I said no 3 times in a row. Here they are, by a campfire, with the love questioned, with the pre-discipleship name. He gets it. And that's why he's hurt. He's affected now. He's no longer wondering, why is this whole stage set this way? And all he can do is just say what he feels. But it's with a different tone. See, Peter was famous for sticking his foot in his mouth. He was famous for speaking first and thinking second. He did this on several occasions. He did this at one point in Jesus' ministry where people were starting to kind of sniff around, what is going on with this Jesus? And so he asked the disciples one day, hey, who do folks think I am anyway? And they kind of kick around some ideas. Well, some say Elijah, some say you're John the Baptist raised from the dead. And then so Jesus just puts it right out to the disciples. But who do you say that I am? And Peter blurts out, well, you are the Christ. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I haven't figured it all out, but you're the Christ. You're the one we've been waiting for. And Jesus celebrates and says, well done, Peter. You have not figured this out, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. On you, on your testimony, on your belief, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But Peter's feeling pretty good about himself. Nailed it. And then, in the very next scene, Jesus is saying what that's going to mean for him. That he's going to end up going back to Jerusalem, which is hostile territory. He's going to get basically killed, and it's not going to be a pretty thing at all. And as soon as Jesus starts talking this way, which is exactly the opposite way that anybody in the first century would have expected things to go down, Peter gets in Jesus' face. And he speaks before he thinks. And he says, that's not going to happen to you. That is not what we're going to do. We're going to avoid Jerusalem so you can continue to live and start this revolution, and then we're all going to be on top again. That's what he wanted to say. But all he did was say, that is not going to be what's going to happen. And immediately Jesus takes him by the shoulders, shifts him over, and says, get behind me, Satan. Well, that's not very nice. So Jesus knows how to get Peter's attention. Later on, Jesus had just done a whole bunch of ministry for a whole long day, and he needed some alone time. So he goes up in the hills a little bit, and he tells the boys to get in the water, and he'll meet them up shore somewhere. And in the middle of the night, the guys are struggling against the waves, and here comes Jesus walking on the water to the boat. And that freaks people out as it would. And so they're freaking out. Jesus says to them, hey, don't freak out. It's me. I'm just walking on water. No big deal. Okay, he said it's you. It's all okay. So Peter, what does he do? He blurts out. He says something before he thinks about it. He says, well, if it's you, Lord. It's like why are you doing this, Peter? But he's not thinking about it. He says, if it's really you, then command me to come out on the water and walk with you. Not thinking that he might actually take him up on it. And so Jesus says, okay, come on out. And so Peter gets out of the boat. And he starts walking, and then you know what happens if you've seen the movie. He sees the wind. And as soon as he sees the wind, his focus is off of Jesus. He starts to sink like a rock. Screams out for help. Jesus rescues him. And the tone I see in Jesus is I just see him laugh. He says, you have a little faith. Let's get back in the boat. And they moved on. Peter was famous for speaking before he was thinking. He did it again and again and again. But not this time. This time he's been asked in a very powerful, potent way, do you love me? And this time he's thinking about this. He's thinking about the gravitas of this moment. And I think with a breathy voice, he's like, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, then tend my sheep. Oh, the tend my sheep, feed my lambs, those are all interchangeable too. What I want you to notice first off here is I want you to notice the tone of the whole thing. Because sometimes, especially in our Western tradition in the last 200 years, but even longer than that, we have developed a pretty elaborate schizophrenic view of God. In Jesus, we have a loving God, but then don't tick off Dad. Talk about wait till Dad comes home. We have a picture of God as judge, this angry dad who's coming home after a long day of work and really needs food because he's getting really grumpy, and now you have to face him with all of your wrongdoings. That's kind of the picture that we've developed about the God of justice. And even in our dreams, and I say that word very specifically, even in our dreams about when everything comes down and God judges the world, there is a part of us that longs for a God of justice to bring it to everybody else. But for us, we want campfire Jesus. I want to challenge you with this idea that when we see accountability happening, when we see a person being restored, being conversed to and with about who they are, where they've been, and where they want to go next, I want you to see this picture. Because this is not lightning bolt God. This is not God wielding a sword that's wanting to cut you in half and send you to hell. That's not the picture that we have here. And this is like the final picture we have in the Gospel of John. The final face of God incarnate, of what it looks like when you're busted. And the picture that we have is beautiful. This is not a courtroom setting. This is a campfire. This is not Jesus bringing it down and telling Peter what a jerk he was. This is Jesus disarming the whole thing. Let's just go sit down by the fire, Pete. Let's have a conversation. This is bringing everything down because that's where it needs to be. Now, you can probably already guess, if we had the opportunity to talk to Peter's wife, he was married, I bet that she had some stories to tell about times when Peter left his socks on the kitchen counter or something, I don't know what, and she told him for the 100th time, don't leave your dirty socks on the kitchen counter. And immediately, instead of just saying, you're right, I'm sorry, Peter, probably initially because he says things before he thinks about things, probably would blurt out why it's no big deal and she should get off her high horse, blah, 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 because that's who Peter was. Do you think Jesus probably knew that that was Peter's nature and that that is human nature? You bet. So when Jesus seeks a conversation with the goal of restoration, the goal of resurrecting Peter from the death of a disciple to a reinstated disciple, which is what's happening here. When he does that, he sets the stage so that the whole environment and the feel of the space is restorative. Jesus isn't raising his voice here. They're having a good conversation. So when we think about Judgment Day, if you have dreams of God kicking everybody's butt that you want God to kick the butt of, you just need to remember Campfire Jesus. And by the way, if you have fear or you talk to anybody who has fear about that Judgment Day and whatever, I don't know, I mean, that's such a mess to think about. We'll unpack that someday. But whatever that thing is, and if you talk to people who are freaking out, send them to John 21. And say, you know, if you really want to see what angry God looks like, it's the Campfire Jesus. Because this is the last picture of it. Let's have a conversation. The whole thing is wrapped in love and respect, from the setting to the tone to the words, everything. That gives me great confidence that if there's a come to Jesus meeting in my future, I can breathe deep and I can relax a little because it's going to be in a campfire setting, not a courtroom. Is that good news? That's good news. The other two interesting things here that I think are worth looking at. One has to do with the fact that he keeps asking about this love thing. Do you love me? It's very curious. He never brings up the denial thing. He never even talks about it. He never says, well, this is what the state is bringing against you. Did you or did you not deny knowing me? Never even talks about it because he knows that that kind of record keeping is totally off point. Religion likes to do record keeping. Religion is our tool to try to understand who God is, but religion is not God. And so when Jesus is having a conversation, he's not asking about his religiosity. He's not asking about, did you check all the boxes here? He's asking the most important thing. Well, do you love me or not? Because that's what it's all about. And I'm sure as soon as he started saying love, especially by the third time, Peter's remembering Jesus saying, the most important thing to do, the most important command to keep, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, because if you nail that, you cover the rest. And now he's being asked, do you love me? That's a really penetrating question. I've been here it'll be 18 years at the end of October. That's a long time. Not long enough, though, don't get any ideas, all right? So, but I remember my first season here, we taught this class, and in one of the tenets of this particular session I was teaching had to do with this very thing. Do you love me? Do you love God? And I'll never forget, because a person in that class who I deeply respect, and I'm so grateful that he said this, because whether or not he knew it, it was a very vulnerable question. And he said back in front of everybody, I respect God. I revere God. I'm even a little fearful of God, but I'm not sure I can say that I love God. Oh, that's awesome. And how many of us are there? How many of us live in that kind of a relationship with God up there that we're a little bit terrified of, and so we try to mind our P's and Q's to make sure we don't screw things up? But that's not at all. That is not at all what Jesus is asking, is it? He's not asking, do you fear me? Do I scare you? Do I intimidate you? Do you revere me? That's not the question. The question is, do you love me? Do you love me? You know why? Because if we love somebody, that is going to take care of everything else. My wife and I will be married 25 years in just a couple of weeks, which is awesome. And I got to tell you that what will not warm her heart when we come to the 25th is me making a list of all the wonderful to-dos I've done over 25 years of marriage. That is not going to do it. But what will do it, and it will come easy for me, is to tell her how much more I love her now than I did before. Not because I didn't love her much before, but because my love for her has only grown. And while I have certainly blown it in my life, and as a male, enough said, right? I've certainly blown it over the years. I know that at the end of the day, she knows that I love her. And that is the prevailing thing that is going to motivate me toward her in the future. It's all about love. Jesus didn't give a rip about Peter's religiosity because it's all about love. And if you have that right, everything else will take care of itself. But then notice that when Jesus asks him, do you love me? Because that's really the core issue, is who God is the face of God, is what we've seen witnessed in Jesus, the heartbeat of God, what God is all about, which is the restoration of all things, restoration, resurrection, renewal, all these beautiful things, grace in the world, which is a choice and a stretch all the time. Are we so in love with that it animates our behavior? So notice that when Jesus said 3 times in a row, do you love me? And Peter said yes. The first words out of Jesus' mouth were not, then could you please write a worship song for me? Could you please write a poem for me? I want you to do something then. If you love me, show me. You're not earning my love by tending my lamb, feeding my sheep. You are showing that you actually love me by doing the things that I do. Prove it. Jesus' brother James, when talking about faith and works, he says, you tell me about your faith, I'm going to show you my faith by the good things that I do with my life. Love alone means nothing. Love alone is just a Hallmark card. Love without action is simply words. But love backed up with an ethic, with an ethos, with a tone, with everything about us that is supported and undergirded and motivated and animated by that love, now we're talking. And that's what Peter is getting. By the way, when Peter is hearing these words, tend my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, what he is hearing is, you're back in. I'm calling you back to your discipleship. If you're saying yes to this, you're back in. I'm great with that. This is reminiscent of the prodigal son who blows it in whatever he was doing in a far country. And it was such a mess, he came back not to be a son again, never expected to be a son, but just to be a servant under his father's household. And as soon as his father saw him, he runs to meet him. And the son is about to give the speech about why he's so sorry, and if he could just be a hired hand, he'd be fine with that the rest of his life, and he'll be good and all that. And what does the father do? Puts a robe on him and gives him his signet ring, which means that he had full access to his bank accounts all over again. Fully reinstated. That's what's happening here with Peter. Fully reinstated. And I want to tell you that Peter got it. We know Peter got it because either in his words or his followers' words, remember this in a letter that went out to the early church. In the next slide, we have this. Peter says to the church, I have a special concern for you church leaders. I know what it's like to be a leader in on Christ's sufferings as well as the coming glory. Here's my concern, that you care for God's flock with all the diligence of a shepherd. Not because you have to, but because you want to please God. Why? Because you love Him. Not calculating what you can get out of it, but acting spontaneously. Not bossily telling others what to do, but tenderly showing them the way. I think Peter was fully restored. He got it. So what's the lesson for you in this today? Maybe you're carrying around baggage and you've been holding it back, wearing the mask as long as you can with other people and with God, thinking that, well, if I just don't bring it up, then it's all going to be okay, because you're fearful of how God is going to handle you. Campfire Jesus is how God is going to handle you. I'm sure this was an uncomfortable moment for Peter, positive, but I'm also sure he would never have traded it for anything, because it caused him to reevaluate, reassess, and renew his commitment as a follower of Jesus. And every time we do that, it is another taste of restoration. So maybe for you, maybe today is your come to Jesus meeting. And maybe you just need to come face to face and hear the whisper in your ear, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Knowing that at the end of your statement, especially if it's, yeah, I love you, then there's a coming thing of, well, then feed my lambs. You're in. I want you to be in. But maybe for you, it's another side, which I'm sure was important for the early church to learn, and I'm sure they did this. Are you in conflict right now with somebody? If not, no worries, because you will be, because you're a human being. As you prepare to resolve conflict, how are you going to do it? Are you going to come blazing, full of all your stuff and all the reasons why you're right and they're wrong? You're going to go sideways with that somebody because they deserve it? Or are you going to tend my sheep? You're going to follow Jesus, which is carefully constructing the right space to bring about this kind of a conversation, because that's what it looks like. I don't know how this is going to meet you. I don't know where it meets you. I don't have a fancy ending to this talk, because I think the story is its own ending. And I think it is penetrating enough for it to just be there. So, please join me in prayer. So for those of us, God, who are struggling with shame and guilt, for who knows what, we might know, you certainly know, and you see us struggling and waning and wasting away because we are fearful of what restoration might look like. And we know we're not growing the way we want. We know we're not experiencing your love in ways that we know is possible, but we just don't feel worthy or whatever. We feel shame, we feel guilt, we feel fear. God, help us see reality here, that your nature and your posture toward us is love and grace, and your goal is restoration. You bring clarity. You bring us by the fire, by the fire's light, that we would see, that we would be warmed, that some of the things that we need to get rid of might even be scorched, but your desire the whole way is that we would be restored. So God, help us trust your character, your nature. This is what you're about. This is what you care about. You want to see us restored, so God, help us meet you at the campfire. And give us ears to hear you say to us, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And God, with great seriousness and reflection, help us evaluate that. Help us evaluate our response to your question. Help us realize also that if our answer is no or I'm not sure, you don't love us any less. You're not any less graceful with us. It's where we are, but if we do indeed find ourselves captivated by who you are, and we want to have a life that is molded and modeled by your love, then give us the courage to say, I love you. And if we have said, I love you, help us hear the meaning of the words, tend my sheep. Because you're not asking us to write a love song, you are asking us to live like someone who loves you. So, may your thoughts become our thoughts. May your values become our values. May your work become our work. And God, as we find ourselves in our next conflict, where, especially if we feel justified and we're angry and we just want to tear this person apart, remind us of Campfire Jesus. Remind us that this is what restoration looks like. And help us reevaluate our love statement to you. And help us rethink our approach, that we might actually follow in your footsteps. And as people are restored, may you receive the glory. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.